Out of every Bankai Kubo has shown, Ikkaku Madarame's Ryumon Hozukimaru may be the strangest within the series. And this has nothing to do with what it actually does. It's actually strange how little we've been allowed to see of it. It appeared in a single fight, and it's still one of the greatest Bankai reveals when it comes to how it was adapted within the anime. During the Arrancar arc, Ikkaku slammed two halves of his Shikai together as he yelled out Bankai against the Arrancar Edrad. Seated officers who are below the lieutenant rank simply are not supposed to be sitting on this kind of power. Bankai was reserved for captains. Why does a man who is obsessed with fighting keep his strongest weapon in his back pocket? But you know who doesn't hide their Bankai? These are the individuals who are subscribed to the channel. Only 20% of the people who watch these videos are actually subscribed, so if you enjoy this kind of Bleach content and you want to see more, then hit the bell notification and the subscribe button for even more videos just like this. Ikkaku's reluctance to activate his Bankai is something that Kubo would reuse with other characters later on. Shunsui being an obvious example, a man who only reaches for his Bankai when no other option is left. In its sealed state, Hozukimaru looks like an ordinary katana, although the hilt is hollow and it holds a small amount of blood clotting ointment. According to Kubo, this is just a natural property of the sword, rather than some gadget or add-on that Ikkaku has attached to it. He also carries the blade in one hand and the sheath in the other, and he fights using both of them. This highlights that he's way more thoughtful and skillful when it comes to fighting than his grinning brawler exterior would lead you to believe. In his Shikai form, he yells out extend as he slams the hilt of his Zanpakuto into its sheath as the two become a single long spear. Ikkaku can also use a lesser known command called split apart, which breaks the spear into 3 sections joined by a chain. He swings it around like a flail and he catches out opponents who believe they are outside of his range of attack. This means that his Shikai itself has a hidden second form. It's a trick that he keeps tucked away. For a character whose entire arc is built around hiding his Bankai within Bleach, a sword that also hides what it can do feels a bit more than a coincidence. Ryumon Hozukimaru is made up of a monk's spade and a guandao linked by thick chains to a central axe blade marked with a dragon crest. It looks visually incredible, but this is the bit that fans love to point at. It gives Ikkaku nothing extra. He has no new abilities or defensive options, or a boost to his own body. Edrad actually says this out loud during the fight. All the Bankai does is hand him a much bigger, deadlier weapon, plus a pool of power that grows the longer that he fights. This element of growth is the real gimmick of Ikkaku's Bankai. He straight up describes his own Zanpakuto as being lazy. It would rather sleep than fight, so it refuses to give him full power on the onset of Bankai activation. He has to wake it up by trading blows, and as the fight drags on, the dragon crest gradually fills with red until it reaches its peak. He is able to speed this up by spinning the whole thing over his head, but the principle is the same. The Bankai starts off weak and it builds up and gets stronger gradually. This is amazing characterization because the 11th Division maniac ends up with a sword that refuses to let him finish a fight quickly. As a practical weapon though, it is a nightmare. It is slow to get going and the blade is also brittle enough to crack under a heavy hit, so he is constantly forced to choose between taking the blow on his own body or risking his Zanpakuto. With some of the opponents within the Bleach universe, it's safe to say having a Zanpakuto that's slow to start and easy to break is just one of the worst combinations you could possibly have. Why does Ikkaku hide his Bankai? Well, this is where there is a bit of confusion. Ikkaku isn't hiding it because it's weak or because he is embarrassed by it. He hides his Bankai because the moment that anyone finds out that he has one, his entire life plan will fall apart. Within the Soul Society, being able to perform Bankai is basically the qualification for becoming a captain. So once word gets out that Zaraki's 3rd seed is able to achieve Bankai, the offers will start coming in, and we literally see this happen. After Aizen defects, Renji, the man Ikkaku originally taught to fight, comes to him and tells him to take the empty captain seat of the 5th Division, since there is nobody else who is qualified for it. Ikkaku flat out refuses, and his reason is one of my favorite character beats in the series. Becoming a captain would mean leaving Kenpachi's squad, and the only thing Ikkaku actually wants is to keep fighting under Zaraki until the day he dies. He even turns it back around on Renji as he tells him, "You want to surpass Byakuya, that is your goal. Mine is just to die in battle serving that man." Once you understand this, the secrecy stops being mysterious altogether, and it's simply the price of staying exactly where Ikkaku wants to be. It also transforms Ikkaku's Bankai into a bit of an open secret among a very small group of people. Yumichika has obviously always known, given the two of them are partners. Renji knows from their time together growing up, Iba is aware of it, Mayuri had sussed it out, and Ichigo only finds out much later, and this is via a second-hand account at that. The point is that for someone who has been around as long as Ikkaku, barely anyone actually knows what he is capable of, and the people who do tend to keep it to themselves out of respect for why he is hiding his Bankai. It is worth comparing Ikkaku to Yumichika here, because Yumichika is essentially doing the same thing but from the opposite direction. His true Shikai is actually a Kido type ability, and the 11th division openly looks down on Kido, since they pride themselves on pure swordsmanship. So Yumichika deliberately fights with a watered down version of his power, and he lets people underestimate him. So you have got two members of the same squad, both who are deliberately hiding their real strength. Ikkaku hides his Bankai because revealing it would push him up and out of the division, while Yumichika hides his Shikai because revealing it would brand him as the wrong kind of fighter to even belong within the 11th division. So to survive within Zaraki's squad, they instinctively hide their powers, but for completely different reasons. The light novels reveal that Ikkaku actually comes from a fairly prestigious family, whereas Yumichika grew up as an abandoned child on the streets of Rukongai, which is pretty much the opposite of what their personalities would lead you to assume. Ikkaku even has a younger sister called Shino. This highlights that there is a lot more going on behind Ikkaku's grinning headfirst brawler attitude. Whenever Shinigami enter the real world, the Gotei 13 places a limiter on them called the Gentei Reiin. This caps their power at 20% so that they do not do damage to the world of the living just by being there. This is demonstrated in the Arrancar arc where Hitsugaya, Rangiku and the others are struggling against Grimja's Fashion until the limiter is released, and the second that it is, they finish those same enemies off almost instantly. And as Renji points out, that seal only ever gets applied to captains and lieutenants. Now remember what I said earlier, Ikkaku at this point in the story is only a third seated officer, so going by the rule, he had no limiter on him whatsoever, so the version of Ikkaku that nearly died against Edrad was already fighting at 100% power. For years, this was just a bit of a fan theory as the sort of thing that people assumed had to have some catch to it, but Kubo was actually asked about this directly on his fan club Klub Outside, as a fan wondered whether if someone like Ikkaku, whose Reiatsu sits close to lieutenant level, would also be sealed by the Gentei Reiin. Kubo answers no, as he explains that the limiter only goes up as far as lieutenant and captain. Ikkaku was at full strength the entire time this means. He emptied his entire tank of power, and he broke his own Bankai in the process, and he still only barely scraped past a single Fashion. Compare this to Rukia, who is also not a lieutenant and therefore also wasn't limited, as she took out her opponent in a single hit and then went on to kill an Espada not long afterwards in Hueco Mundo. Siphon even mentions that the Gentei Reiin seal gets applied automatically the moment that you pass through the gate. Yeah, so a fight that already made him look weak makes him look worse once you accept that he had no limiter placed upon his power, and he was fighting at full force here. During the 1000-year Blood War arc, when Hashward breaks Ichigo's Bankai, Mayuri spells out a rule that we didn't really know much about before. Once a Bankai is broken, it cannot be repaired. The only way back is to completely reforge it. And to really make this point land, Kubo goes all the way back to Ikkaku, using his Bankai as an example of one that has been damaged beyond saving. Even after Akon rebuilds it so that it looks the part, Mayuri notes that it is nowhere near what it once was. The raw destructive power of Ikkaku's Bankai is gone. This rule that Bankai don't ever heal holds up within the series. Mayuri's giant creature is something that his sword produces, and the actual Zanpakuto never leaves his hand. So when Uryu wrecks the creature during the Soul Society arc, nothing irreversible has really happened. Then there's Komamura's Bankai, which is actually an exception to the rule. Any damage that is sustained by the giant Kokujo Tengen Myo will damage Komamura's own body, and conversely, when Komamura's body is healed, the Bankai will also heal. Even Renji's false Bankai, Hihio Zabimaru, was shattered by Byakuya during the Soul Society arc, and the fragments that were broken by him had stayed damaged. This now brings us to the events after the first Quincy invasion of the Soul Society. When the Zero Division appear, they take a specific handful of people back to the Royal Palace. These are Ichigo, Renji, Rukia, and Byakuya. The novels say that the selection came directly from the Soul King's will, and that the exact criteria was never fully explained, but there is a clear thread that runs through all of this. Every single one of them comes back having unlocked the true nature of their power. Ichigo has his Zanpakuto reforged from the ground up, and he finally learns who he really is. Renji discovers that his Bankai was never even complete, with his Hihio Zabimaru being replaced by So'o Zabimaru. With this new Bankai, he returns noticeably stronger. Rukia also unlocks the real depth of her Zanpakuto with her awakening Bankai, and Byakuya, who was literally on death's door. He wasn't going to survive unless he was taken up to the Royal Palace. Byakuya had become so strong that Aznot had confused Byakuya's Shikai for his Bankai. At the Royal Palace, not only were the Shinigami's injuries mended, their Reiatsu was raised via Kiryu Hikifune's cooking, their relationships with their Zanpakuto were strengthened thanks to Uetsu Nimaya, the creator of the Zanpakuto, and lastly, each of them had underwent individual training with Ichibei Hyosabe, the monk who calls the name. Unfortunately, Ikkaku got none of this, as he wasn't on the special Royal Palace list. For all we know, Ikkaku's Bankai may be in an incomplete state similar to how Renji's was. To be honest, the selection of who went to the Royal Palace was pretty narrow, and there were plenty of other capable Shinigami who could have went. But I do believe that this could have been a turning point for Ikkaku's character, but instead his weapon is still damaged from the Arrancar arc, and with no meaningful power-ups, Ikkaku remains comfortably as the third-seated officer of the 11th Division. It's difficult to talk about this without putting Ikkaku next to Renji, because the two of them had started out in almost the same place, but they have ended up miles apart, and the difference comes down almost entirely to ambition. Renji always had a goal driving him forward. This was to surpass Byakuya. This hunger kept pulling him into tougher and tougher fights, and it's ultimately what landed him in the Royal Palace with a true Bankai in the end. Ikkaku doesn't really have this type of ambition, as he wants to stay exactly where he is at Kenpachi's side. With this mindset, it leads to him turning down every single opportunity that would lead him to a promotion. Instead of reaching for new heights, Ikkaku is very comfortable at staying still, and standing still doesn't make a Zanpakuto any stronger. You see a very similar scenario with Chojuro Sasakibe, who held a Bankai for centuries, but he hardly ever used it. And similar to Ikkaku, he didn't want to leave the side of his captain. Will we ever see Ikkaku's Bankai again? Well, 12 years after the defeat of Yhwach during the Bleach Hell Arc one-shot, Ikkaku has taken up the lieutenant's position, which was left behind by Yachiru. He also has opened up his own dojo, and he started training Renji's daughter Ichika. There is a bit of irony in Ikkaku's promotion, because as a lieutenant who's now operating in the world of the living during the Hell Arc chapter, he now falls under the exact same Gentei Reiin that skipped over him as a third-seated officer in the Arrancar arc. Let's hope that in those 12 years, Ikkaku has got way stronger, because as a third-seated officer, he damaged his Bankai while applying full force against Grimmjow's Fashion. I doubt that we're ever going to see Ryumon Hozukimaru again. Even during the fake Karakura Town arc, there's a suggestion that Ikkaku threw his fight rather than revealing his Bankai, because there were so many different captains, lieutenants, and seated officers on the battlefield at the time who would have witnessed his Bankai release. Also, at that point, his Bankai was also broken, so most likely he had given up the fight anyway. So Ikkaku's hidden Bankai stays hidden for the simple reason that Ikkaku doesn't really want to progress any further. We've now reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to you. Do you think Ikkaku made the right call keeping his Bankai a secret this entire time? Do you reckon that we will ever see Ryumon Hozukimaru again, or is the permanently broken Bankai simply a part of who he is now? Let me know your thoughts by continuing the discussion in the comments, and lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next Bleach video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.